Welcome to the Birth Launch Podcast, an empowering space for expecting and new parents to hear candid conversations with experts and learn how to craft your ideal birth. We will tackle the scary and weird questions that come up along the way and provide answers that are driven by science and evidence-based recommendations. I'm going to show you how to redefine parenthood and choose what's best aligned for you and your goals. With 10 years of experience in family education and a master's degree in human development and family studies, I'm ready to help you navigate pregnancy and explore your birth options to free yourself of fear surrounding childbirth. My goal is to help you have an informed and confident labor experience, plus an empowered and joyous postpartum. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, HeHe.
I am so excited to have you here. I think this is a darker topic. This is a topic that is, it's not taboo because it happens all the time. And there's, oh my gosh, millions of people who can resonate with this topic, but it's an icky topic because we don't want it. These aren't things that we're planning for. These aren't things that, are conversations around exciting topic, but this is a topic nonetheless that I think is important to have if you're going to have a baby, because the reality is anybody that goes in to have a baby has the potential to have an unplanned cesarean. And often unplanned cesareans are unwanted as well. And that comes with a heavy heart and heavy conversations and hard feelings and emotions to feel and to process and to move through. And so I'm very, very, very excited to have you here today to talk about all of that. I shared in your bio that you've had your own C-sections. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that has led you to helping women who have had unplanned C-sections when that was just not, that wasn't their expectation, that wasn't their desire. It's not how they wanted or saw their birth going when they had planned this whole journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think the big thing for me was feeling as though my initiation into motherhood was severed through this process. I was a home birth, transferred to hospital, and it's heartbreaking to come to that point knowing that this plan that you had created, and of course, our birthing plans are really based on our morals and values, like some deep core beliefs. So when that gets interrupted by the need of this medical intervention that really does sever this initiation into motherhood in some way, the emotional, spiritual aspect of it absolutely is a big struggle afterwards. And you're left with these feelings of failure, whether it's like my body failed me or I failed my baby. What could I have done differently? Should have, all these things are really woven into the postpartum experience. And not only that, but you're now dealing with a major surgery that often gets swept under the rug because the focus is on this new beautiful baby that's in the room. And that's what I see so often, is that all through the birthing process, the mother isn't really centered as much anymore. It's really focused on the baby. And then especially when it happens with a cesarean, it's like this rescuing of the baby from the mother's body. And then all of the postpartum focus is put on the baby. So there's so many complicated layers to this experience. And not only the change of birth plan, but then the aftermath of everything after.
Yeah. What does that aftermath look like? So in people that do come to you for support and say, I just didn't, this was not my plan, and it's what I ended up with, whether it be necessary, medically necessary, or whether it not be medically necessary. What does that look like in people who, their birth just took a different turn than what they had expected and planned for?
Yeah, a lot of it, interestingly, comes down to the treatment from medical professionals really causing what we would consider birth trauma. And so grappling with being dehumanized is a really big piece to this experience, especially when it comes to home birth transfers. There's this thought and belief around women or birthing bodies being irresponsible. And so being treated poorly once you get into this place of already potentially needing, truly needing a medical intervention to give birth. So grappling with medical professionals that aren't treating people that well is a really big one. So coping with the aftermath of feeling as though they did something wrong, or just like I've had a few people who were told that by the medical professional afterwards that they believe they could have done it, if they had to just tried a little bit harder. So I think it really does stem from this patriarchal dominance of the control of women's bodies. And the aftermath of that is huge. Obstetrics has a pretty checkered past, is born out of a time where there was a lot of chaos in midwifery being disallowed. And so we've really lost touch from the origins of a lot of trust in women. And so that's like a tangential explanation of a lot of women coming to me that just have lost trust in themselves due to the influence of medical professionals, or just feeling as though they didn't have the capacity to stand up for themselves when they're in the throes of labor, and
Mm.
we all know that we just don't have those capacities. And maybe it was that you were in labor for 30 hours, or things just happened in a way that you needed an intervention, or maybe you didn't need an intervention, but you were coerced into having one. So really the biggest thing that I do see is that there's a lack of trust in your own
Yeah.
self, lack of trust in your body, and a loss of sense of self through it all.
Yeah. That's all kind of been bred into us, right? Though, because we see it in movies and on TV that birth is this crazy, out of control, scary, emergent thing. We have a medical system that is designed to work directly against what biological and physiological labor requires of its environment and the support around it. It is, the 7-minute prenatals where you don't even have a chance to get to know the person. It is the restrictive policies. It is the non-evidence based practice. It is the familial history of, well, everybody in my family has had a C-section, so I must be destined to have a C-section. And at the very first flicker of things not going according to your quote unquote plan, that's it. I knew I was going to have a C-section. Just cut me open. It is so many layers that are leading people to unplanned C-sections. It's not just a lack of education. It's not just a broken healthcare system. It's not just the outside opinions. It's not just, TV and social media. It's all of it accumulated into a culture around
Mm,
what birth is and isn't. And yeah, we've gotten so far away from the nature of birth.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there's a lot of shame that
Mm,
comes from that. There's a lot of shame around having an unplanned cesarean, and whether that's from people saying, you gave up or you chose the easy route, or internalized shame because people are rightfully angry that this was their unplanned cesarean, that was the result in their birth. You know, I see a lot of people, a lot of birthing bodies isolating and suffering in a silo, suffering in this insulated place, and scared to be vulnerable because there's so much minimization of the experience. Just be happy that you and the baby are safe, that sort of thing. And I think it really stems from this moralistic well-being that, like, you have the choice. If you just prepared enough, if you just had a better mentality about birth and you didn't allow any like bad vibes in, then, this wouldn't have been your reality. And like you said, there's so many different influences from so
Mhm.
many different avenues that it's not about choice at the end of the day. Some people need medical interventions. And
Yeah.
we live in this beautiful time where we have that option, and I have my very biased opinions about the medical system and how it treats birthing bodies. However, and I'm example of this, like I needed an emergency cesarean to save mine and my baby's life, and I'm so grateful for it. And there is a lot of unnecessary cesareans out there, and there is a lot of mistreatment of birthing bodies out there.
Yeah. Unplanned also doesn't just mean unnecessary. You can have a medically necessary cesarean and also experience these big feelings and this piece of like, I didn't want this. This wasn't my plan. And I also at the same time can hold space for this is what my baby and my body needed, right? I think that that is one of the hardest things for people to go through. The unplanned, unnecessary ones, I almost feel like people are more desensitized to that idea. And it's harder to reconcile in our brains. I didn't want this, but I also recognize that it was the safest. It's because, or in my opinion, it's because you literally had no choice at all. Just none. Like it was stripped of you of how you birthed your baby, and now society's kind of stripping you of the right to kind of feel disappointed in how your birth went. Yeah, I love that you bring up, man, I don't love it because it's so icky, but I love that you bring up the whole, well, you and your baby are safe. At least we got a healthy baby and a healthy mama, but that's not always the case. Someone who is physically okay, but mentally spiraling and suffering because they were diminished or dehumanized in their experience is not a healthy mama. A baby that needed NICU stay that could have otherwise been avoided had we not intervened too much or too fast or with so much vigor, that's not a healthy baby. And so a baby on the outside and both of them being alive does not equal healthy baby, healthy mama. And a lot of times that C-section experience is diminished to that.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, it's that sense of powerlessness.
Mm, yeah.
A lot of the birthing bodies that I see had to be put under general anesthetic and don't remember the birth at all or were unable to be present for the birth because they were put under. There's different iterations of that. It doesn't always have to be somebody being under GA, but the sense of powerlessness is really prevalent in the feelings of hurt and anger and not being a well mama in the aftermath of having given birth. And, the people who ended up needing to have a cesarean before they were even able to go into labor, like you had mentioned, typically those people that I've seen resolve their their pain a little bit sooner.
Mm,
And
mm-hmm.
that's not always the case. I don't want to say that that's like for sure you're going to feel better sooner than everybody else. It's not about comparing experiences.
Yeah.
However, there is often like a not the sense of powerlessness that other people experience, even though they are powerless in some ways to their body, like preeclampsia and those kinds of
Yeah.
things. So there's still, I'm sure you're able to see a bit of a theme. There's still that feeling of like anger towards the body. Like, why couldn't my body just do the thing that it was born to do? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's tough. That's a tough space to be in. So I guess my question next is the most obvious one. If it's something that we experience, where do we go from there? How do we start to resolve this in our body and our brain? How do we start to cope with the experience that we had, whether it was unnecessary or necessary? How do we begin to move through this? But it is one day at a time. So anybody listening who's like, oh my God, I'm not ready to do that, you don't have to be ready. That's okay. Take your time. It is day by day. It's a gradual thing. This is something that, like I say, you're going to move through. This isn't something you're going to cure or you're going to be able to fix. We have to move through this experience and help your body and your brain and your nervous system and your family dynamics and your mental state, your mental health, all kind of cope with the experience that you had.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And you said it, really a big piece is nervous system regulation.
Mm.
When we're in the healing process from an unplanned cesarean, oftentimes people are stuck in a fear response. They're stuck, their bodies are stuck in a protective response. There's often fears. Postpartum anxiety is a really big one that I see a lot. Intrusive thoughts, fears about getting pregnant again, lots and lots of fears, and understandably so, because your body is in a protective place. It's made sense of this experience as something that was harmful. And so it's going, essentially, your brain is like shit talking you to protect you from getting into another situation that's going to be hurtful again. So, what we do is really calm the nervous system. Like that's the initial piece, is finding ways to soothe the nervous system, get back into that parasympathetic nervous system, like the rest and digest, and kind of like begin tracking your triggers is a really good one that I love to teach people, because triggers hold a lot of wisdom. Despite how painful and irritating and overwhelming they are, that is like our body's check engine light. Like there is something here that needs to be tended to. And so that's like one of the first things that we do in the program that I offer, is to nourish the nervous system and to begin tracking the triggers. And then we dive a little bit deeper into core beliefs. In my therapy practice, I'm primarily an EMDR practitioner, which is a big modality that helps with trauma. So I've really utilized a lot of these tools in the coaching work that I do. So tracking the triggers, nourishing the nervous system, those are big, really, really big. Getting your body, your mind, your spirit, your emotional body to feel safe again, to feel like you can open up the doors to be a little bit more vulnerable, that you don't need to protect yourself, that you don't need to be in full on overprotection mode of your baby.
Mhm. Mhm. Because those things can present as or even exacerbate other things like postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety. They kind of go hand in hand. How many people would you say that you see have trauma from their birth, from their unplanned cesarean, and also are struggling with something like postpartum anxiety or depression or some sort of mental health complication in that postpartum period?
So many. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
so many. And I struggle with pathology, even as a licensed therapist. I really struggle with diagnoses and pathologizing people, because it's often so much greater. I think it does also really offers a wonderful framework. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm here for diagnoses if they fit and feel good and help you understand your experience. But I also feel like sometimes it's this allowance and identification with a pathology that takes away from us tending to some of these other pieces. And yeah, it's complicated for sure, my opinion on this, because I really believe like we end up treating the wrong thing. You end up coming from this like top down approach instead of looking at the way that you were treated in the birthing room. Like that may not even be a reality to some people that they're able to recognize, because they're stuck in this place of fear and protection. Like, they may not even remember some of these pieces that are really the foundational building blocks to why they're feeling this way. And when we come at it with a diagnosis and end up treating in certain ways, like sometimes we don't really look at what's underneath it all. And that's a pretty grand oversimplification of it. I feel like diagnoses are really important, and I feel as though they are kind of this gross simplification of a really big picture. And sometimes our medical system just doesn't tend to the pieces that are underneath it all.
It's like not really
And
getting down to the root problem. Like there are deeper things than what we're actually addressing, or there are deeper things going on than maybe what is presenting on the surface level. But if we just ask a few more questions, if we just dig a little bit deeper, we would see that it's actually more of an iceberg. There's a lot of stuff underneath, and we're just seeing that tip of that iceberg.
the iceberg's such a good metaphor. And also, sometimes people, even with a few questions asked, aren't
Mm.
able to identify what's going on underneath of it all. And until you begin to regulate the nervous system and peel back a few layers and allow people to feel safer, some of those things aren't going to come to the surface because they're so deeply in this place of protection.
Wow. It really is something that we have to untangle. We have to it's like a web of things that happen to us that cause different reactions that then all overlap one another, and we almost have to, you know, work it backwards, unbraid it in order to get down to what your individual root problems are so that we can help you build back up stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, these negative core beliefs that we have about ourselves, or like these feelings of failure or anger towards yourself, perhaps like, well, I deserve this incredibly difficult experience to happen to me. A lot of these things didn't start just from this experience either.
Mm.
You know, tapping into the psychology of it all, oftentimes we have experiences earlier in life that kind of build up these building blocks towards feeling this way. And that's when we end up seeing like mega trauma, mega PTSD. There's often always something else that's happened earlier on in the person's life that is kind of set us up for really being hit hard by birth trauma.
What are some of those things?
Oh gosh, it could be so many things. I come from an attachment lens, and so I really believe healthy attachment is super important early on in life and throughout your life. You can build it at any point in time in your life. However, it could be something so simple as like being bullied in high school, you know? And of course, I don't want to say it's like super simple to just be bullied, but like when we look at trauma, sometimes people don't think about things like that. I don't know, like a sporting accident, or just like even sometimes spraining your ankle randomly, just things that take you out of your body and are impactful at a certain point in time. Maybe those littler traumas ended up making you miss out on certain things in life that made you feel like a failure. So it's like your body, your brain is building these blocks of what has not made us feel good. And so it wants to protect us against those things later on in life. And so when we have other experiences that kind of look like that experience earlier on, it's going to put it into that box. And so you keep building up these boxes, filling it with things. And then when that box gets so full with similar experiences, that's typically when we see like a big PTSD situation.
Man, and all of these things are things that during pregnancy and even before that, we can start working through to hopefully kind of minimize the impact of, that accumulation of those past experiences, of the beliefs that you have, of the things that society or the world around you has kind of conditioned you to believe. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, coming back to the attachment theory, you're a lot easier able to navigate these experiences if you feel like you have a safe environment to do so.
Yeah.
So that brings me back to the work that you do after having an unplanned cesarean, because a lot of the times when you're in the postpartum difficulty of healing from this way, your fear and your protection makes you feel detached.
Mm,
It can make you feel detached from your relationships around you, including your baby. A lot of people feel as though they gave birth. A lot of people struggle with saying that they gave birth, but they're like, "Is that my baby?" Like, that's a very real experience of people who have had unplanned cesareans. And so doing this healing work so you can create stronger attachment is so important. And some people go through this experience and are able to just have no problem. Like, they overprotect and they're like,
yep.
"I never want to let my baby go." And so sometimes that's not a great attachment style either, you know?
There's a balance. There's a balance in having a healthy attachment style with your baby. Okay, one thing that I wanted to dive into that I think is interesting and probably perked up a lot of listeners' ears is tracking your triggers. Talk to us about that. I think that you were speaking about it in postpartum, post unplanned C-section, post birth plan going not like we had navigated. When you first said it, in my brain, I thought, ooh, tracking triggers in pregnancy to help you understand what your triggers are in birth. So it's just so fascinating to me to think about tracking triggers. Can you talk to us about how that can help? And then maybe what are your thoughts on tracking them in pregnancy? Do you think that would be helpful? Because in my brain, I'm like, yes, that is super helpful. That would be awesome to know what your triggers are and how they affect you. How do you respond? What's your reaction to these triggers? And is there anything that you can do differently?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, tracking triggers when you're healing from an unplanned cesarean can look like feeling triggered by hearing a vaginal birth story around the time of your baby's birthday. That's a really big one. What else are some great examples? Pregnancy announcements. Yeah, those are the three biggest ones that I typically see, and then, of course, there's everybody's unique ones. But tracking triggers in pregnancy isn't something I've thought about, because you're not exactly going to be triggered by hearing a vaginal birth story when you're pregnant, perhaps. Yeah, unless you are healing from an unplanned cesarean and got pregnant again, then it's going to be really intense. It can be really intense.
Full whammy almost. You've got like two parts to that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. A few of the women that I've been working with have since become pregnant again, and it's really added an additional layer to their healing experience. And I'm just so honored to see the work that they are doing, and also, witnessing those triggers that they were tracking. These are really that's like the ultimate fear for somebody who wants
Hmm.
to have more kids, is to go through the same experience again.
Yeah. So once we've tracked them and we've identified our triggers, what are we doing with that information? Because you don't want to
Mhm.
run from them. I think a lot of our instincts is like, okay, I'm just going to avoid all pregnancy announcements. I'm not going to any baby showers. I'm not going to go to dinner one to one with friends that I know who are trying. I'm not going to listen to people's birth stories. I'm not going to join a new moms group because I don't want to hear other people's birth stories. What do we do with that information in order to not become, this person that is always running from our triggers?
Yeah, and it's definitely sitting in it.
Yeah. That
Sorry.
sucks. so bad.
And of course, like, you're not just going to sit in it and be tortured by it without tools and
Yeah.
support. This is the big thing, is becoming aware of those triggers is so important so that you can get ahead of them, that you're not
Mm,
blindsided by them. And the other piece is, with nourishing your nervous system, your window of tolerance is going to continue to widen. So when you're dealing with all the layers that we've talked about, and you're still in the throes of the early pain, it your window of tolerance is going to be so narrow. And so
mm,
that flight response is going to be pretty natural.
mhm.
And maybe that's actually the thing that you need to do, is to turn off all social media and avoid those things until you can get to a place where you're able to nourish your nervous system a little bit more. You're dealing with a major surgery. Like,
Yeah.
let's reiterate that for a moment as well. And there's a big physical recovery component
Yeah.
that you're dealing with, let alone the emotional and the spiritual aspects. So, if your initial response in those early days is to run, shut off all the things, like, power to you. You need space. That's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
basically what you're
And
saying is
also, go ahead. Sorry.
So basically what you're saying is filter the triggers that you can filter out. 'Cause some of them we're not going to be able to get out of. We can't take your baby away. Seeing your baby may be a trigger. We can't take that pain away. Every time you roll over, you need help getting up, you need help getting down on the toilet. You realize, oh, I have to come downstairs and stay downstairs all day long because I really shouldn't be up and downstairs because I just had a major surgery. Those things may all trigger you, but unfortunately, they're not things that we can take away. So the things that you can, having friends over that just have had babies, being on social media, listening to the podcast that you used to listen to that shared birth stories, those things you're suggesting maybe take them out of your life temporarily so that you can deal with your triggers in chunks and get a hold of where you are. And then you can take on more slowly and slowly as your nervous system learns to regulate and deal with the things that are in your current kind of trigger space, right?
Yeah, I think if you're finding those things triggering in the early days and you're in a place of complete and utter overwhelm,
Mm,
and it feels like you're kind of drowning in it, then yeah, do what you need to do to find spaciousness for you to tend to all of the above. I think you said something really important there around the physical piece being triggers, because you're reminded constantly by your limitations. After having a major surgery, those limitations are constant reminders of something that was really hard, the unplanned cesarean. So, we look at how we treat so many other surgeries and how much time and rehab we give them. It's not talked about in the same way for cesarean. So I think tending to those physical needs are really important in the first span of time. Of course, we know that. And if you're noticing that these other pieces, like birth stories, pregnancy announcements, are triggering you, then absolutely take them away for a time, create some boundaries around that, and allow for yourself to heal, physically heal, and then start dipping your toe into what may feel challenging. Because it can be easy to just turn absolutely everything off and never go back to it. And you have to be pretty aware of where you're just then hiding, hermiting, isolating from these very real things that are going to continue to, you're going to continue to be faced with throughout life.
yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay, this has been so eye-opening for so many people, I think, especially for me. And my last question revolves around partner support. What can our partners do in terms of helping us navigate and cope with the fact that our labors did not turn out like we had wanted or hoped for or planned for or expected, because we know that partner support is huge. We know that that social support is humongous. The first thing that I think we as a Tranquility by HeHe team recommend to people, and it's something I will forever stand by, is you should be telling your partner, if you are the partner who did not have the baby, you should be telling your partner who did have the C-section, we can get you some mental health help, right? Like just anybody, somebody to talk to. You should be encouraging your partner to be able to navigate this experience. And I think a lot of times partners get scared to bring it back up because it's such a sensitive subject. But one of the best things you can do is get your partner some social support.
Mhm. Yeah, and also, like, most oftentimes your partner was there and witnessed
Yeah.
a really scary thing happen with
Yeah.
an emergency cesarean or any unplanned cesarean, like, I think we also don't check in with our partners
Yeah.
enough, and yes, I want to center the mother, the wombed one. However, I think a lot of our partners kinda get missed as well in the
Yeah.
experience. So, really great questions instead of, minimizing comments are a really big issue throughout this healing journey. And people are really uncomfortable with birth in so many ways, but especially when it comes to unplanned cesareans. It's icky, it's dark, it's not comfortable. And so the common knee-jerk reaction is to say things like, "We'll just be happy that you and your baby are safe." So it's really important to just be able to have the capacity to ask questions like, "Hey, how are you feeling?" And then when somebody comes forward with some really dark and difficult emotions, or what society considers to be dark and difficult emotions like pain, grief, anger, despair, not to minimize it or push it away, to hold space for it. And even if it is just like sacred witnessing in silence and like a hand on the leg or on the shoulder, like empathetically connecting with somebody through just honoring and witnessing their emotions is so powerful. Community is a big element to this healing. And sometimes we don't always have community. So we don't often have that commune of support behind us to let us know that this experience and the spectrum of emotions that go along with it are completely normal and natural. And people often minimize our emotional reactions. And so, with sometimes our partner being our greatest support, you know, having conversations with them around creating a safe space for you is so important, especially when it comes to like boundaries with in-laws or other family members. Advocating for you in those moments can be really important, because the greatest pain that I often see is when people have their emotions minimized. So if you're a partner, or if you feel like your partner is unable to hold your emotions, that can be an incredibly difficult situation to be in, because the natural response is to often turn inwards and to suffer alone in silence. And so I would love to say, like, find ways to advocate for yourself and find mom groups and things like that. It can be really important. I host a Facebook group where there are a bunch of women and wombed ones who come together who can support each other. And, you can bounce ideas off of one another, where, how do I get my partner to support me in a better way? I think there's a lot of really great resources out there that stem from like couples counseling that can be really helpful as well. And again, coming back to that attachment based perspective, it's so real between parents as well. Having the ability to be safe and vulnerable with other humans is truly the underlying foundation of us feeling healthy.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Okay. In terms of resources, you have a program for people. Tell us a little bit about that. And I'd also love to hear a little bit more about EMDR therapy and how that could benefit people who have birth trauma, not necessarily just from unplanned C-sections, but EMDR is a good trauma therapy in general for all sorts of traumas.
Yeah. Yeah, the program that I run is called It's a New Birth Story, and it's really about helping women to repair their relationship with their birth story after having an unplanned cesarean and reclaiming that initiation into motherhood. And even if you've had other vaginal births before, and this happens to be like a later unplanned cesarean, we really look at each birth as individual and as an individual initiation into motherhood. And so there's a lot of earth-based practices. You know, I teach a lot of eco psychology in my therapy practice. And so we utilize a lot of these beautiful earth-based medicines and practices because it really is about coming back to our traditional ways of being and knowing. And it's really about recentering the mother. So huge. Like I had said in the beginning, like it often comes to or becomes about like rescuing the baby from the mother's body. And so we're all about nourishing the mother and like recentering the mother, getting her back, getting them back to feeling into themselves. You know, there's this notion in Mexico. I had my baby in Mexico, so I had this beautiful Oaxacan midwife, and very traditional teaching tales often came in our times together. And she talked about when the woman is in labor, that her spirit is traveling to go and find her baby's spirit. And from my perspective, when I had my cesarean, it was like it interrupted that process. Like my physical
Mm,
body was cut open, but not only that, my emotional and my spiritual. And so a lot of these practices in the program are bringing back the emotional and repairing the emotional and the spiritual body, bringing them back into the bodies so that you feel more whole.
yeah.
Again, because that's really the foundation of secure attachment is feeling your own truth, your own identity, knowing yourself so that you can show up for others around you without feeling burnt out.
Mhm.
It's such a huge piece. Like if you're trying to deal with all these woundings that have happened even from earlier on in life, it's really difficult for you to show up with confidence and truth. And so it's a really big, beautiful program that not only covers the unplanned cesarean part, but does really beautiful healing work from all areas of the life because it does all build up into what we see as pain in the here and now. And the
Nice.
goal is to just show up as like your best self as you would. Yeah,
I love that. Okay,
yeah.
tell us a little bit about EMDR. How does that look, and where could someone find a practitioner?
Yeah. So EMDRI, EMDRI.org. EMDRIA.org is where you would go. This is the International Organization of EMDR. And you can find a therapist on that website. And the people who are listed on that website are trained, have done lots of supervision, and have been like approved by the international organization. So if you want to find somebody who, without a doubt, has had a lot of training done, that's where you would want to go. In terms of how it treats, I love explaining this to people because it's really weird. They didn't actually know how it worked for a long time. So that was fun to explain to people. Like, it works, we just don't know how. But what they know now is that it's very similar to REM sleep, which is the most healing state that our bodies can be in. So it uses bilateral stimulation, which is this like left right. They used to use hand movements where you would trace the practitioner's fingers left and right. And so it's like activating the left and the right brain. So the part of the brain that holds memory and the part of the brain that does the fight or flight response. And so when we have traumatic or difficult experiences, our body and our brain just doesn't often store them properly. Kind of like where I talked about, it gets put in this box that it kind of looks like that thing, but maybe that's not the right thing. So this information is stored in weird ways in the body. I like to think of it as this delivery truck going between these two islands. The first island is like short-term memory, and the other island is long-term memory. So when we receive information through our daily experiences, it's like we create all these files. And this delivery truck takes them typically to the long-term memory island where they get stored, filed appropriately. But when we have trauma or a difficult experience, it's like that truck gets in an accident on the bridge. And then there's all of these files and papers scattered everywhere, and it's chaos. So it's like when we have difficult experiences or traumatic, whether that's like a little T trauma or a big T trauma, our body just doesn't know how to store those files. It doesn't feel good to us. And so often that information is just like floating around errantly in our body. And it really pops up to the surface in weird ways a lot of the times. So what EMDR does is it traces down to where these experiences were stored in these boxes that maybe don't exactly make a lot of sense. They get stored improperly, and then it sorts the files for you. So that's the part of the brain that does memory and the part of the brain that does fight or flight. So it activates both and reprocesses the information so that it can be stored properly in the long-term island filing cabinets alphabetically. And it's just so incredibly helpful. It can be an incredibly spiritual experience as well for a lot of people. Everybody processes differently, visually, physically. And I've had people have really beautiful insights that come in that they've identified to be similar to like plant medicine.
Yeah.
So our bodies are incredible at healing. We're meant to be able to heal. We just need to be given the right environment to heal. And so I find EMDR is very much shepherding your body's ability to heal.
That is amazing. And if you're out there and you had an unplanned C-section, whether it was necessary or not, you are not alone. Jessica's already talked about the isolation that comes along with that, but you don't have to do this alone. There are practitioners out there to help you. There are communities out there to help you. There are friends and family who have had similar experiences that you have had as well. So be sure that you're reaching out, you're talking to people. If it's not your partner, make it a mental health counselor, make it your healthcare professional if there's somebody that is receptive and you trust and that will help get you connected to other people. Tell your doula if you had a doula. You've got a world of people out there that love you, and we want to help you make this better. We want to help you get back into that confident, full body feeling of refinding yourself after this, neurological car crash. I love that analogy of like your truck with all your files has gotten in a car accident, and now we need these emergency services to come and help us pick up the pieces and put ourselves back and get us back on the right track to our destination. Jessica, this has been such an amazing conversation. I definitely thought I would cry more than I cried. You take this topic that is very heavy and you make it like not scary. You made it feel manageable, and I think you made it feel like you're not alone. Like there is a community out there of people who can also have the same experience as you, so that you're not alone. Unplanned C-sections often make me emotional because a lot of them are so avoidable, and they do imprint so much trauma on us, and it breaks
Mhm.
my heart that our system is definitely not designed to avoid them, and it's almost designed to encourage them.
Mhm. Yeah. 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 Thank you so
Thank
much.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here with us today. I want to give people the chance to connect with you if they're interested in your services or your program or following along on your social media so that they can keep learning from you and maybe connect with your community. Where can people find you online?
Yeah. On Instagram, the name is
Yeah.
It's New Birth Story. You can always email me at jess@itsnewbirthstory.com, or we have a Facebook group called Unplanned Cesarean Repair, and it's repair your relationship with your birth story, but you'll find it if you just search Unplanned Cesarean Repair. Yeah.
Nice. That's awesome. What an amazing resource. Well, thank you so much for being here with us, and listeners, thank you guys for tuning in today. It's always so much fun hanging out with you. I feel like these conversations are pivotal in so many ways, and it's helping so many people achieve the birth of their dreams or heal from a birth that did not go as planned. So, as always, thanks so much for hanging out with us today. Until next time, bye, you guys. Thanks for joining us. I'll see you next time on the Birth Knowledge Podcast. Until then, head over to Instagram and find us at Tranquility by HeHe and give us a follow. You can also check us out at thebirthlounge.com.